Chris and I love doing this podcast, but an unexpected result of it is a growing collection of historical artifacts and memorabilia related to some of the topics that we've covered. But when I'm looking for something like that, I always stop at Mini Museum first.
One of the coolest pieces we actually have in the studio here is they had a piece of the glass, a fragment of the glass from the atomic shield windows during the testing for the Manhattan Project that we covered during the Oppenheimer episode.
That was a lot of fun to do. One of my favorites is the piece of samurai sword that we have to kind of commemorate our samurai episode. Man, that was a bloody, bloody episode.
I feel like it classes up the studio just a little bit, brings a little sense of nobility to it. They actually even have bundle deals for the things that you're interested on at a better price. So if you go on there, you're feeling a little saucy, you want to get a couple things. They actually have an American bundle pack coming out right now.
Yeah, it comes with a brick fragment from Springfield, the home of Lincoln, a chunk of marble from the U.S. Capitol steps that were installed all the way back in 1870, and a brick fragment from the 1938 renovation of the White House. That is Americana in a bundle.
That is a lot of America. Whatever you're interested in, they've got you covered. One of the coolest things I got sitting in front of me right now is for my birthday. Adam was able to find a piece on Mini Museum. It is from the original Star Wars A New Hope, that scene in Tatooine where R2-D2 and C-3PO were traveling. You see that skeleton of the crate dragon in the background. I got a piece of that sitting right here on the desk. And if you're into real space stuff, they actually have like meteorite pieces and fragments.
You guys are in luck because Mini Museum is running 20% off all display case items for the month of July. You don't even need a promo code because they already discounted it for you.
What are you waiting for? Go to minimuseum.com to get a great deal on a fun piece. That's mini, M-I-N-I, not many, but you will find many things on minimuseum.com. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode. We are taking you guys on a little trip today to the Far East, the mystical land of China, to discuss British narcos.
Seems like an odd pairing, doesn't it?
Who would have thought that the first cartel was the country of Britain?
Queen Victoria.
The OG narco?
Narco queen. I mean, we're going to visit the Middle Kingdom today. And China
Opium Wars, baby.
Yeah. This is something that I kind of had a little knowledge of. I knew that there was a war over opium. Didn't realize who China was facing off in the war of opium.
Any drug-related wars, if you're doing any type of search on that, this has got to pop up. Because technically, is this the first war on drugs? Or war over drugs? War for drugs?
It's the first of something that I can't quite put my finger on. But yeah, I mean, diplomatic trade, and I'm sorry again that we banged out the British during the Scotland episode or the English during the Scotland episode. Brits, you're going to have to take another washing again. But guess what? We also get to throw in the United States because we were just a part of this as well. We were almost worse because we were a little
should
brother.
talk on a pretty equal opportunity basis about everyone.
Yeah.
In fact, I actually think we probably talk about the shit that goes on here in the U.S. more than we talk about worldwide stuff. But here's the deal, Britain. You guys have had a long storied history, and the larger your history is going to be, the bigger the chances of you fucking up is going to be. It's just, it's an extrapolation. And so, yeah, you guys do have a lot of fuck ups, but this one, oh my God. The Opium Wars, it's the easiest thing for me to possibly understand. I think out of all the things we've discussed, and it ties in, and we were talking about this before the start of the episode, it explains the current state of China in a completely new lens for me. I'm not saying this is, a pro-China, all that rah, whatever shit, but when, a lot of you guys listening to this come here to kind of get a different perspective or to kind of delve deeper into certain things that maybe other history podcasts kind of gloss over, or just listen to me and Adam bullshit. And by the way, I got to talk about this guy. I've listed 3 of my top reasons why you are better than Britain to me. 1, you've never forced drugs on me. You've made them available, but you've never forced them on me, which I respect. 2, you respect the rules of people when you come into their house. You don't just come in and do whatever you do at your house. You respect the rules. You've always done that, even in beer pong, house rules. The other thing is you don't dislike equality.
Love it.
You're a pretty pro-equality guy.
Love it.
And the three things that we're going to discuss here, three of the things we're going to discuss are the exact opposite for Britain. And man, this is a eye-opening thing as far as like it gives you reason why maybe China is a little more closed off and doesn't share a lot with the rest of the world.
This episode for me is like when you see something off in the distance and you're squinting at it, and then you finally just zone in enough to see exactly what it is. You're like, oh, that's what it is. Because for the life of me, I didn't really understand why China felt so negative towards the West. Then it came into focus.
Yeah.
This sort of brought some things into focus.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we should still they should still harbor these same resentments. I can't blame them if they do, though.
And here's the thing, too, is as far as the scope of history goes, this is very recent. We're talking that, this occurred essentially the first Opium War. We're going to condense this because essentially the thing they consider the Opium Wars took place over a more condensed period of time, but there were actually two wars, but kind of
It was like 8 years, 10 years.
There's a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
A little separation between them. So September 1839 is when the first Opium War starts. Thinking back on that, man, that's less than fucking 200 years.
Yeah, it is.
That's what, 3 or 4 people ago. And here's the thing is the result and the repercussions of this. It wasn't just like the second war ended and everyone was just like, oh, we're going back to business as usual. The things that occurred after the end of the first, and then also at the end of the second, have a huge, just insane kind of like shockwave that reverberates throughout all of China.
And the worst thing that you can do for propaganda is give China a ground and a footing to pour your propaganda on.
When your propaganda is still recent enough that people can see in the correlations of how their lives are still impacted by it, you can spin it and build it up. What do they call it when you can punch it up?
Yes.
You can punch it up, but as long as that is rooted in some type of historical fact, people are more likely to believe it. It's like when you have to tell a lie, you have to pepper in truths into the lie to make it believable.
And so you can remember a few different things to go back to if you need to, which
Exactly.
is exactly what the Chinese Communist propaganda playbook is.
Okay, we're almost 6 minutes into this. We've been playing just the tip with these fine people. I say we get into it. Before we do, guys, rate, review, 5 stars. We've been getting a lot of messages from you guys. We love the interaction. We love the feedback. Keep it up. We're going to keep doing this thing as well as we can for you. And you got anything to add?
No, but thank you. I mean, it's been awesome. The outpouring, everything like that, as far as messages that we've been getting. Talking to you guys is awesome. We put in some things. I always say no, and then I talk for about a minute afterwards whenever you ask me this. But when we say, reach out to us for this, or we want to hear about this story, hearing from you guys about this stuff is great. Like it's really nice to know that we've made a connection enough to where you want to reach out and share your stories on stuff or things that to add to different discussions that we have. Like, we love having these discussions between each other, but to hear kind of what you guys think too is pretty cool.
So keep it up, guys. And without further ado, we're getting into the Opium Wars. All right. So tell me about opium. Let's go ahead and start there.
Full disclosure before we get into opium, we just tried a new strain for this one that hasn't been tried before, so I'm not sure where it's going to take us, but it seems like it's been a pretty fun trip so far. Mm-hmm. So as we are smoking Cookie Burger, pretty sweet name, we got to explain where opium came from. Opium is just like a dried sap that gets harvested off of a young opium poppy plant. They're native to like the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea. They are. It's a plant that can't grow everywhere, but there are certain fertile sites to where if you can grow it there, it's going to be great. There's other different kinds of poppy plants. I know, like in California, there's like a great poppy, not a harvest, but like where they all bloom and everything like that. And there's massive fields. Those aren't the same thing as opium poppy. Opium poppy, in and of itself, is just a different derision.
Derivative.
Yeah, sure. Derivative of a poppy plant.
Different than the Costco poppy seed muffins, also.
But you can get, maybe that's an urban legend, that you can get popped on a drug test for poppy seeds.
You got to be eating a lot of poppy seed muffins,
Yeah.
I would assume.
I love that dressing, though.
Yeah, that's true. So it's a dried latex from the seed capsules. So 12% of essentially what makes this up is, and we're not fucking chemists, but 12% of it is essentially morphine, correct?
Yeah.
Like the chemical formula of morphine or anything. And then a derivative of morphine, which I did not know until reading about this, is heroin. So a lot of stuff comes from poppies. A lot of stuff has been chemically altered to come from poppies.
And that's, heroin is essentially the chemical separation of the opium out of the poppy seed resin. So it's just like a concentrated super version of it.
This may be completely like incorrect, so bear with me. Would you say that in comparison, if like morphine, because it's the natural 12% of that would be cocaine, is heroin kind of like the crack? That it has to be chemically altered or changed?
It just gets it further concentrated.
Okay.
I would say
it's dabs.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that that's a pretty good description of how you would kind of use a normal drug to explain. I don't even know if opium like is still smoked or exists.
Oh, I think it is.
It would have to be, right?
It's got to be a niche thing, but I there's got to be some type of like, yeah, I definitely think it is.
I think I did see that Iran is like the #1 producer of opium in the world, which makes sense that in the United States we wouldn't really hear about that because you always want to hear bad shit about Iran, but it's pretty cool that they're still smoking opium.
Do they use it essentially to create opioids? Is that what they're using the formula for? Or is at this point are opioids completely chemically produced?
I think you have to start out with some sort of a beginning chemical.
Or have found a way to recreate that, like chemically. So opium, yeah, like Adam was saying, first used, and this is when it's been documented to like be used and everything in the Mediterranean region back as far as 5000 BC. First documented like cultivation, which basically means it's being grown, not just like found. They're actually actively growing it, is in Mesopotamia, 3400 BC. So we're moving up a little bit more toward current times. It was known as the joy plant, which, based upon what I read about the effects of opium, definitely it's an apt name.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, how do you not want to? You want to come back to my place and smoke some joy plant, or I can put it in some liquid. England did actually go ahead and use opium, but they used it for a variety of reasons. When I was reading the list, it actually was kind of funny. So pain, of course, it's morphine. If you're thinking about that, it's essentially what am I trying to say here? Not a tranquilizer, but a what do you call a painkiller medically? Cortisone or Vicodin or Norcos. Those are I can't even think now. Basically, it's a painkiller.
Yeah.
So they would use it for pain. Oh, if you had a cough, those coughs can be painful. So of course you use opium for that. You get dysentery. Of course you're going to take opium for that.
Is dysentery the shits?
Well, they said they separated dysentery and diarrhea, which I thought dysentery and diarrhea were the same thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, they'd use it for, you get a little bit of the squirts. I had Taco Bell last night. You should probably take some opium in the morning.
Got a sore neck from sleeping on a shitty pillow. Laudanum.
Yeah. Where's my opium pipe? You also had usage in China as far back as 1483. They used it for something different, which this made perfect sense to me. They used it as a male enhancement to go and enhance your sex drive, your virility, your sperm count, make you more masculine, which if we're thinking about like the herbs and all those kind of like medicinal things, like gimmicky stuff that would come out like fucking, wow, what was the shit they always used to sell in gas stations?
Rhino Rush.
Stuff like that had like a
Dick pills.
ginseng mix and all that kind of shit. Male potency is basically what it is. And they would also use opium for like kind of in the same way that England was doing like tea parties and these elaborate like ceremonies, they would basically just kind of do opium tea parties. Or like, the upper crust of society would basically just get yacked out of their fucking minds and hang out. And maybe if it had uses for that sex, that turned into some orgies.
I feel like if I did enough opium, I'd forget that I had a dick, though. So I don't know how my performance would be enhanced.
And I mean, it had been used for a long time in China as well, but more I think is for both the medicinal purposes, but not on a wide scale, more available recreational level. So it eventually becomes a problem, though, in China due to essentially the way that it's viewed either by the current emperor or whatnot. But prohibition actually in China starts in 1729.
Well, such a big change. The product that they used in Great Britain that we used in the Americas was a product called laudanum. And laudanum is just basically opium mixed with alcohol. And like you say, with any of those issues, you would be drinking it. And once you drink it, it changes the way that it affects your body because it rushes to different parts of your body.
I just made a connection that I never thought about because I didn't know what it was. In Tombstone,
Yeah.
his wife is drinking laudanum that was prescribed by the doctor. So she's essentially drinking opium.
Yeah. And along with all of those reasons that you would take laudanum that you listed, one of the other reasons was to calm babies.
Fuck. Yes, that's right. They would mix it and give it to fucking kids. Just take a little laudanum, take a little whiskey, rub it on their gums, sleeping in no time.
Yeah, it works for me.
70% chance they wake up the next day.
Yep. Like you were talking about, opium dates back to China since the 7th century. And the reason that it goes back so far and the reason that it wasn't shipped in as much was because this is where opium was one of the things that traveled along the Silk Road. And the Silk Road traveled all the way from the Middle East and connected over to China. So you would see it in medicines. There were kind of crude, like shitty, not really stepped on, but just kind of like weak versions of opium that they did grow in China.
Snake oils type shit.
Well, and I'm sure that they were poppy plants, but they weren't like very strong. Like you weren't getting the best stuff. And when the Silk Road would bring things in, they would use it in their medicines. Unfortunately, traveling on the Silk Road over land is going to take a shitload longer than if you can get it there by sea.
You're also probably dipping in because you're traveling over the Silk Road. You're probably dipping into the supply as you go just to make it fucking tolerable.
You all might lose a day somewhere along the trip.
Well, fuck, man. Think of the distance of that. Like, in terms of just sheer fucking landmass that stands between that. Because the Silk Road, it went all the way Middle East and then didn't touch like the Mediterranean, because the Mediterranean does dip into like Eurasia and all that kind of area. And
I think the Greeks were along the Silk Road or started the Silk Road maybe.
It was close enough to that area through like Mesopotamia and everything that I think, there had to have been, because that's kind of, it was used in Mesopotamia as well. So when it was cultivated.
That'll be its own episode coming up.
Oh, definitely. But yeah, I mean, it had been there for a long time, just not in the amounts that it's going to be flooded with, and making it more readily available to a larger portion of the people.
Well, that's where the changeover happens, because just like we were talking about, traveling over land is going to take a lot longer. The Portuguese, which I think I texted you this maybe a couple months ago, I had zero idea that the Portuguese in that little country that they live in on the little kind of southwest corner of Spain had such a strong navy. They were such a strong water power. They were their own kingdom.
That's all they did, because, how if Spain's going to try to take you over, you're going to be taken over.
Yep.
You're surrounded by Spain and nothing but water to your back. So the only way for you to go and expand militarily is out.
Out to
sea. So you literally have half your country is coastline. And the only way, and you're small, so the only way you're going to get resources is by going out and getting them. Same deal with, it's the same fucking shit with Britain. They're basically just a landlocked Britain.
It blows me away that they had such a big naval empire. But eventually they found their way over to the Far East. As I referenced earlier, China calls themselves the Middle Kingdom. The belief inside of China was that they were the center of the universe. They were the kings. And what we're going to talk about today during the Opium Wars, legitimately, when it started out, there's debate whether China was a larger or a more rich nation than Great Britain was. So China was making its inroads and doing really well, but China was always pretty reluctant to deal with outsiders because they had been able to control their borders enough to know that they could trade to their west a little bit. They could trade to their north a little bit because they'd fought this in this region for so long that they still had some push.
And think of it this way too. So Britain's wealth comes from its colonies because as far as land, they can only produce so much on that land. And because of their climate, they can only produce certain things on that land. So their economic power comes from essentially all of the resources they have from all of those colonies. China may not be as advanced from a development standpoint, but the thing that people need for exports and everything, food, the things that can only be made in China, like silk at that point, porcelain, and a few other things. Tea. We're going to talk about fucking tea here in a second, which is one of the catalysts for this whole thing. You have China, who has a much larger pool of exports and availability, which also fucking comes into play when it comes to like the trade agreement and what they're wanting to trade and not trade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get to the reasons for why everything happens the way that it does and how trade kind of goes. But eventually, when the Portuguese go over into China and they make it over there, they kind of cut out a rough agreement and they're given an outpost called Macau. I think Macau is the largest gambling center in the world.
Macau is like Vegas, just fucking 100.
It's like Vegas and Bangkok had a child, I think.
Yes.
And so...
One night in Bangkok makes the heart
exactly. But this kind of port island of Macau that they have all of a sudden changes everything for them because they have a place to where they can go drop off goods that they want to then trade with China. China is also cool with it because they're not allowed into their country. The capital of China, Beijing, is going to be up towards the north in China. So if you can keep all of the invaders and all these barbarians, I heard the word a million times, and it's odd to connect it with these guys. But if they can keep them in the south and away from the kingdom, they don't have any influence.
That's a huge thing, is when we're talking geographically where all of this is occurring, it's all like based out of the South China Sea. So I was looking at a map too, trying to figure this out. So, I mean, yeah, you got to sail all around the tip of Africa. You got to sail up around India through the Indian Ocean. And then when you get around to where like Hong Kong Island is going to be, Canton, that area, it's all super southern. But like you had to go through so many islands and backtrack and everything where like the Philippines and all that stuff is, like New Guinea. They literally, as soon as they hit China, they're like, we're not going any further. This is where we're dropping shit off in China. This is the first China we've seen and we're just unloading shit here.
We had to go so far just to get here. But they open kind of this outpost of Macau, and their rule is the only port or the only city that they can drop in is Canton, which is modern day Guangzhou. This was in 1557. That was so long ago that they had hit there and landed there.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong. So Guangzhou geographically, so we're looking at if you're thinking of China as a clock, everything's going to be taking place at 6 o'clock. There's that's the South China Sea. You then have an inlet for one of the rivers, and going up the river then gives you access to Canton, correct?
I believe Canton is just the whole area, or Canton. All I know is I'm pretty sure
settlers of Canton.
That's where Cantonese Cantonese cooking comes from, and Cantonese is some of the best Chinese food that you can get. Cantonese food is awesome. So this spot in Canton down there, Canton, whatever it is, was kind of like the first time that outsiders were let in, and the first time that China kind of starts working with anybody off of their continent.
You can also, at that point, you're in such control of that they can't go any further north than that. So you really don't have to worry about them threatening, like you said, Beijing in the north. At the same time, all they're doing is you're just like, yeah, you guys just drop your shit here and we'll make sure it gets where it needs to go into China. Yeah. We're going to handle all that stuff internally, and that comes in huge kind of later on in this.
All your weird devilish influence can stay down in the south, and we can worry about that. June 27th, 1637, a guy named Captain John Weddell, travels to Macau, and he starts to try to negotiate with the then Ming Dynasty to figure out how they can kind of get some trade in. They were forced to leave the Pearl River Delta pretty much immediately because of just the absolute disrespect that they showed. There will be a time coming up. I believe it's the late 1700s. That I believe his name was Sir something McCartney. He ends up going over to try to speak with the emperor. And one of the things that the Chinese do not allow is for their language, which may have been Mandarin at this point, I don't know, but their language wasn't to be spoken by a white tongue. They didn't want that to get out there. McCartney goes over there. They have some issues because I think he maybe speaks a little Mandarin, and then he is asked to do something called kowtow.
Doesn't his kid... Was it his kid that spoke Mandarin?
I think it was, because somebody got arrested. I think most of them got arrested.
He had like a young kid that had sailed with him that had learned Mandarin like on the voyage and had no idea that you weren't supposed to speak it. And because he's like a representative, it cost him shit.
Yeah. So McCartney is told to kowtow, which didn't know that's where this came from. But essentially it is bowing until your forehead hits the floor. And
is that because it's the cow of your head? I don't know.
Okay. I wish I knew. It's probably a translation of something like that.
Probably.
But McCartney supposedly refused to do this. And along with the language issue, there were a lot of problems. McCartney was sent away. He went back to Britain. He told the king, I refuse to kowtow to this guy. There's no way that I would have done that. I treated him the way that I would have treated any other royalty.
This is where he does go on the knee, right? During that first visit. So instead of doing the thing traditionally in the country that you're trying to get into their good graces, instead he does the thing where it's like he's wearing the cape and he like goes down onto one knee and does like the Tebow, which is basically, I guess, what you would do in front of the king and everything. But at the same time, when in Rome. Do what the fucking Romans do.
He's not Diddy, though. You don't got to blow him. Just fucking bend over and put your head against the ground a couple times. It's not that big of a deal.
Tap, 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 tap.
Look at all the shit that you got going on. So, Britain's kind of shut out of the Chinese trade for a certain time. This is where we get into something very, very interesting, and I'm real excited to do an episode on this. The British East India Company. The British East India Company was a private, quote-unquote, shipping company that was supposed to be not affiliated with any country. Now, I mean, all the British royals and elites owned.
It was government subsidized, basically, what it was.
Well, that and then all of the rich people were the ones that had the hands in it. So there's a transition between government and...
It's like, and they also had their own private, like, full-on naval fleet. It wasn't just about shipping, like a huge fucking naval fleet, man of war, ship of the line type shit. They had a huge standing army. Was it 90,000?
I think they had a whole lot.
A huge standing army. Think of it this way. It's like, think of Lockheed. So Lockheed basically wouldn't really, and someone can correct me, Lockheed probably wouldn't exist in its capacity if it wasn't for the government doing all the contracts. Kind of the same thing. The government and the British East India Company were so intertwined that basically if the government was like, hey, can you go do this for us? They're like, we got you.
No, and then add in 90,000 private contracted military forces protecting the British East India Company. Pirates are a thing at this time. That's not saying that they didn't need protection. The amount of protection that they brought is a bit overkill.
Yeah, think of like Pirates of the Caribbean. That's like the villain of Pirates of the Caribbean is the East India Trading Company. They basically, though, are allowed to kind of circumvent the no British thing because they're not technically the crown. So they're allowed to trade in China kind of as a middleman. So they're basically just going to Britain, picking up all the shit and then transporting it there. The only difference is the ships just fly a different flag.
And for some reason, this I find so interesting that we're talking about something called the Opium Wars. The Opium Wars almost should have been called the Tea Wars because this is so weird to me. But Britain had a very strong taste for tea. Tea came from China. So their love of three things basically just had Britain so enamored with China. It was tea, porcelain, and silk. Now, I felt silk. Silk's awesome. Porcelain's pretty cool. Tea, I have a cup when I'm sick. I like iced tea.
We just talked about this.
Yeah.
At this time in the world, you have water, not safe to drink, no purification process on this. You have beer, which it was more readily drank. You like drinking it for breakfast and everything because it was safer than water, and it wasn't wine.
No, and it could be 2-3% depending on how long you have to ferment it.
Exactly.
It's not super strong beer. You're not
Yeah.
pounding an IPA with breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you kind of shy away from strong drinks like beer or anything like that, you need to supplement it with something and leave it up to British people who have such a delicious taste for cuisine with their Yorkshire puddings and
Spotted dicks.
And then the fact that their, I think, number one like food is curry. I wonder how that happened.
It's not fish and chips.
It's the only thing that has any sort of spice and flavor to it in the entire country. So I could see them getting behind this tea revolution. A murky little bit of water that you boil to get rid of all of the bad things in it, and then you drop a tea bag in it.
Yeah, here's the thing: is it was almost marketed as for its like medicinal properties, which made perfect sense if you're thinking about it from the standpoint of the caffeine. Probably not a lot of other sources of caffeine. We were talking about coffee and espresso being from Italy, coffee being really popular in France. Why coffee didn't catch on in England? Not really sure, but tea also. If you're feeling kind of down, you got a little. What did they call it when you were depressed? What was the old? Oh, we talked melancholy.
Yeah, I was going to say the druthers, but
yeah. And you drink this tea, and all of a sudden that caffeine kicks in, but you don't know. You're just feeling better. It's got that medicinal property to it.
yeah, and I mean you work a bunch of really bad hours at the factory. Excuse me, the factory or wherever you work. You need a little pick me up in the morning. Jesus, if you're not sold on coffee, you're going to need a little energy. Tea was going to be able to provide that. And the whole idea behind medicinal tea, I mean, we still kind of pass that along today as something.
When you're sick, you drink a certain time. You have sleepy night tea. It makes you a little tired. So here we come to one of the catalysts. China has stuff that Britain wants. Britain does not really have anything that China wants. So Britain is like exporting things that are already available in China that they're able to get, on the cheap and everything.
Then what the fuck are you going to do with wool in China?
Exactly. Like one of the exports is being like wool. They're like, it's fucking hot here.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's cold where you guys come from, but we're down like closer to the fucking equator. It gets fucking warm down here, especially in the south. Like, no, keep your fucking wool. So it's almost kind of like they got some garbage products. But what China does really want is silver. And silver, China, that area in China ends up becoming what the graveyard of silver is what it's called. So they just basically want, instead of trade in goods, the only thing they're really willing to take from Britain is silver. So Britain has to basically pull from all of its colonies, try to gain all these silver reserves just to pay for shit, because it's not like they're going to go without. They're going to keep paying however they have to. Well, it gets to the point where like Britain's like, we are kind of maybe like running out of silver. We foresee, due to our influx of what we're bringing in, we're going to run out to keep getting this shit. So a new thing pops up. The British East India Company starts growing opium in a newerly acquired territory called India. And India has the climate and the workers and the land and all that kind of stuff for the East India Trading Company to start growing opium, which they then, because, at this point with the prohibition of opium starting back in 1729, they can't really themselves, because they don't want to mess up their contract because that's huge for them. They just take this, sell it to merchants, and use the other merchants to then smuggle this opium into China. Now, the merchants, because these guys essentially are doing some illegal shit, they're not exactly going into China and being like, hey, we got you guys' opium. Can we now have your tea and silk and porcelain? These guys aren't the sea, silk, porcelain taking payment people. These are more of the people that are like, no, we want fucking like the silver and the fucking money back. So that also ends up pulling the silver back out of China. Now, not all of it's making its way back to the crown. It has to go to the merchants. It's got to go to the East India Company, and then a little bit of it finds its way back. But there now becomes this huge money-making enterprise providing opium into China.
The whole idea of silver kind of enamored me. I like silver a lot. I love ancient coins, things like that. So the reason that the Qing dynasty, Qing, Qing, I guess Q makes the cha noise in China. The Qing dynasty, the dynasty previous to that, used a form of paper money that they had created to where if you were going to trade with them, you had to have this paper money. And things went...
Weird how stuff comes
back around. Exactly. Things went pretty bad with paper money. And so when the Qing dynasty came in, they're like, no, we need the good stuff. We need silver again.
Counterfeiting, more easy to produce, things like that.
Something that worked out really well in Britain's favor was Spain hit South America. And when they hit South America and found all those veins of silver over there, them bringing that back, they were trading partners with Britain. Britain was flush with silver just through this trade. Now, once they make it over to China, and China's like, well, we don't want any of your goods. We just want silver. It creates a trade deficit. Trade deficit just simply is that you're importing more than you're exporting with a country. Mm-hmm. Once you fall into that trade deficit, it becomes very hard to balance those two things. The trade deficit also gets worse because Britain is having to pay in silver because the Chinese are like, no, we dealt with paper money. We don't want any of your exports. Just give us straight silver. Mm-hmm.
It's the only thing that they're pretty much willing to accept because that's now kind of the national currency.
Well, the tough part about it, too, is you have Britain going to war with Spain a few times, and so you start to lose the flow of the silver that you're getting from the Spanish, which means you can buy less from China, which in theory would put a strain on China because their currency system was run off of silver and copper.
You also have, prior to this, not long before, the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah.
So having the Napoleonic Wars, you're also spending a lot of resources, including silver, to go ahead and support your troops and buy materials and all that kind of shit. And because that's involving a lot of other countries, it kind of interrupts a lot of the trade. It kind of pulls your resources and you're not able to do as much in your colonies. It wasn't just the British, the East India Trading Company that were in on this too. Even at this point, the fucking United States was in on this.
Well, there's a couple tricky things about it because technically at the beginning, the British East India Company, who was pulling out of India because India had just become a colony of Great Britain, I believe it was Bengal was one of the big areas. When the Indian dynasty there, the royalty, whatever, had lost their position.
Been deposed or...
Yeah, they had, I think it was the Mughal Empire, had been growing opium already to use. So the British East India Company comes in and swoops all this up. They're the ones that start bringing it into China, and they have the exclusive rights to be able to trade in opium coming from India. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean that they're just selling it to China. They would do these auctions where they would essentially auction off just chests of opium to any country that wanted it. So they were making money depending on whoever the private enterprise was that was buying it from them that would then also sneak it into China.
Okay.
America comes into play because after our revolution and after we walked away, we wanted to get into the opium business too. So we started buying up a bunch of Turkish opium, mm-hmm. and that's actually where the American opium would come from that they would bring over was from Turkey.
Via the Silk Road. I think that
they were going over, they were boating over to Turkey, picking it up, and then taking it over into China. Okay. But everybody had a little bit of hand in this. The French play a very dumbass role.
A little bit
this
later.
Whole entire thing.
Did you see that who some of the American families that made money off of opium were?
The Delanos.
We got the Delanos, the grandfather, Warren Delano Jr., who was FDR's grandpa. There was also the Forbes, and not the Forbes that the magazine are based off, but John Kerry's relatives.
Oh, okay.
Made their money in the opium game. So, yep, dirty fucking hands all around.
Well, the other thing that the reason that this was getting into China is because this Canton port that they were dropping off at, I believe they were called Guangdongs. Not sure I'm great on that pronouncing, but they were kind of like 12 overseers of all of the imports that were coming into the harbors. And these
like admin type shit.
Yeah, these guys were dirty as fuck, and they could be bribed. So you have these government representatives that are sitting down in Canton, not being watched really because everybody else is up north in Beijing in the capital, and these guys can be bought left and right. I think they said at one point in time, one of the Guangdongs, or maybe the lead dong that was in charge of everything.
King Dong?
King Dong, yeah. I think they said he was one of the richest people in the world because he was on the slip from taking all of these bribes, because he would be able to pay the English back in silver, and then the English would then have more silver to buy exports from China. So this guy was essentially using silver that wasn't his to then be traded to Great Britain, and then Great Britain was then spending that money in the port to buy more exports, so he was making money on both ways.
Just skimming it off the top.
Yeah, exactly. Because once he got a hold of the opium, he would go sell the opium to make a profit off of. And this big trade deficit that the Brits had started to shrink, and then it just
kind
went
of
away.
almost without them knowing. Which is weird because it's prohibited. So they're not even supposed to be bringing this shit in. So through this illegal trade, basically flooding illegal drugs into this country. This is the comparison that I made. When you're listening to this episode, just simply change out the countries and think of this. Imagine a country, fentanyl. How do you view a country that brings fentanyl into your country?
You mean China? The most major producer of fentanyl?
Yes. So look at it that way, which is very weird because they had this. So this is where they learned how to do this shit, is you basically have the Brits that are forcing illegal drugs because they're making money off of it, hence the fucking narco title. And that's what's bringing your trade disparity back to level. China doesn't even know what the fuck's going on. There's like, how are you guys like, wow, you guys got a lot of silver.
All of a sudden, Great Britain has this trade surplus, and China has very little silver. This affects China's economy in about the worst way possible, because China had the silver system, and then they had the copper system. It took a hell of a lot more copper to pay things that silver was required for. So as China runs out of silver, they're still taxing their people. They're still taking portions of their money. Poor people that only live on the copper system then have to go ahead and try to make up that difference with the silver, and they're also not giving back the silver because they don't have any to the government. So you just see them running real dry. And like you said, they realize what's going on. They realize that opium's becoming more of a problem. They try to ban opium.
They can obviously see within the public that there's more opium being circulated around. They're like, there's only one place this motherfucking opium can be coming from.
Well, and it's at this point, it's not just an elite drug. The elites aren't the ones that are doing it. It's reached all levels of society. And when you're poor and you need to medicate more, eventually that addiction sets in. Heroin is probably one of the most addictive things on the planet, if not the most addictive. I get it. It sounds awesome, but it ruins lives, and it's a really bad thing. Whereas opium was probably the strongest thing that they had around. So it was also a lot easier to obtain because it was just basically like a little pellet.
Yeah, at this point too, whereas opium had previously been mixed with a drink or anything like that, you now find, and I'm not sure of the year or anything like that, it's probably been used to some degree in this capacity to where it was actually smoked. You have China, which is a big user of tobacco, so you already have people that have smoking devices, and the way that they would actually transport and kind of, I guess, process the opium is it would just be processed into little pellets. You pack that thing with tobacco, all of a sudden you drop in a little opium pellet in there, you light it up. Oh my God, I feel fucking fantastic. I forget about all my troubles. Well, what that leads to is mass addiction of that. You have a populace, which I think they said at one point between 10 and 12 million people were addicted to opium in China, which is an insane fucking number. And these people are responsible for production and agriculture and things like that. And now you're like, why are all these fucking people not working or are working so much, worse? And by, I think it was 1831, they had up to, I think it was 20,000 chests were brought in annually into China. Now that equals 2.8 million pounds or 1.27 million kilos. By 1833, that jumped up to 30,000 going into Canton. It was then, because they couldn't go any further, that was as far as they were allowed to go. At that point, It was then provided to Chinese smugglers, and they just took it and filtered it throughout the country. And eventually, it's not going to take long for that shit to make its way north, because also being technically a designer drug, yeah, you're going to get people that are using it up north, the elite people that want to use it for these parties and things like that. They're like, of course, they're going to find out about it in Beijing.
Yeah, I mean, just that number alone to think of. I mean, if 10 to 12 million people are addicted, that's going to be a hell of a lot. But I don't think opium weighs that much. So 2.8 million pounds of opium seems like it's just like I can't even picture what that would look like in my head. Yeah,
Tiny little fucking pellets.
I love how we just use goofy ass units of measurement through time, like a chest was somewhere they said between like 120 and 140
I
pounds.
literally just see two guys carrying it with their handles and the lid and everything, and just hitting it, piling it down, and being like kicking it open, it flipping. They're just tiny. It's full of tiny pellets.
Yeah. So
Excellent.
at this point, they're just like, we can't do this anymore. 1831, you talked about that. 1838, they just cracked down on all the Chinese drug traffickers because they have to figure out a way to stop this flow from happening. In 1839, this guy named Lin Zexu was made the Special Imperial Commissioner to eradicate opium. Now, Lin Zexu is like, he was untouchable.
I heard the comparison, and it's with this, it's very apt. So he was the Elliot Ness.
Yeah, there was no way that this dude was ever going to be able to be bribed.
Yep.
Which, pretty commendable, pretty cool. He also did some other kind of cool things to help eradicate opium. One of the not cool things was, well, I don't know, cool, not cool at this point. Any of the traffickers, he just had killed.
Yeah, any of the dealers or traffickers, yeah, just kind of. If you watch the recent House of the Dragon episode, where basically the king just has every rat catcher in the kingdom killed, it's kind of like that. He just finds a dealer, isn't really interested in hearing what the dealers or smugglers are doing. Crazy thing though, the users. So if he found people using and carrying, but it was just for personal use, he didn't execute them. Basically what he did, in almost a weird early form of rehab, is he would take these former users, be like, hey, and all of his guys, were told to do this. He's like, don't ever fucking do this again. And in order to ensure you're never going to fucking do it again, we're going to partner you up with a support group. And we're going to join you together with 10 former addicts. And to give you guys just a little bit extra incentive, if any of you happen to relapse, we kill all 10 of you. That accountability system, your accountability buddies in that, oh my God, you have to live in the same house.
Well, that's what I was going to say when you're like, he didn't kill users. I would be like, well, I mean, if they went back to using.
You gave them a chance, man.
Yeah, well, but just imagine you're sitting there in your group of 10 and
someone just itch. I'm fucking jonesing.
You guys are sitting down at the table to eat and you're like, hey, where's Marcus? I don't know. You think you relapsed? Yeah, maybe. This is going to be a bad day.
You always have that one guy when you sit down to eat and he's like, you guys remember opium? And everyone's like, shut the fuck up, dude.
Eat your porridge, asshole.
He tried to go about this a couple different ways too. Internally, yeah, there was kind of a lot of murder going on. Also, in 1839, he writes a letter to Queen Victoria, basically telling her about the British influx of opium into China and basically being like, hey, quit this shit. All of our people are fucking addicted. You need to knock this shit off. Letter never finds its way to Queen Victoria.
Well, also a big part of that letter was, you've outlawed this in your country. Why is your company or country shipping it to my country?
Exactly. It's not like this is like, you can be like, we use it here. It's fine. Like your people don't have to use it. We've deemed this horrible for our own people. But yeah, it's totally cool that we're just pumping all of it. We still want to make it because it makes money. Yeah. We're just going to send it to you.
Well, we need to get your tea. So we need to figure out something you need so we can get our tea.
If you just give us the silver for free or take our fucking wool, we wouldn't be in this situation. Lin basically orders, he comes into Canton. He knows what's fucking going on because in Canton you also have like these warehouses, basically these warehouses that these different countries have set up where they're storing their goods, things like that. He ends up seizing all the fucking opium in Canton. It ends up being 1,300 metric tons. He then takes it out into pits, mixes it with fucking lye and seawater, makes sure the pits are guarded, and then burns the shit. Which at the same time, man, you giving those soldiers the next day off? I don't know what the perimeter around that. It had to be a wide berth.
Yeah.
And then had to be judging on the wind. The guards are changing positions based on the wind. But yeah, you got to be giving your boys the next day off.
Well, and all those soldiers are just so tweaked out on the smoke they were trying to stop people from.
Yeah.
But so this is yet another failure. English, listen up for this because you're going to like this part of it. So the way that Lin ends up getting all of this opium from these traffickers is he goes in, he's like, give me all your shit. I'm going to seize all your shipments. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. He's like, no. I'm going to hold you here and you can't leave until you give me all of your opium. They're like, we're just not going to do that. So there was a guy who was
We're not going to give you all of our illegal drugs that we have in this. Listen, even if we had any illegal opium in your city, we can't give it to you. But we don't have any to give to you.
So this dude steps forward, the British Superintendent of Trade with China, a guy that's based in Canton. His name is Charles Elliot. And the reason why the English need to listen up is because it feels like maybe we're aiming a lot at you. Charles Elliot was Scottish. So we get a little Scot in here. He ends up coming in and he's like, hey guys, listen, go ahead and give Lin all of your opium and we'll figure something out to make it right. And at this point in time, the British East India Company had lost exclusivity. So anybody that had it over there, there was so much of it that it had driven the price of opium so far down that these guys were just trying to get rid of their product and make a little bit of money. Mm-hmm. Once Elliot's like, hey, there might be some reimbursement for you for it. Go ahead and turn your stuff in. Everybody's like, well, cool. So we're going to get paid for this? Okay. They dropped 20,283 chests at Lin's feet.
They thought there was going to be maybe a couple hundred, and they just, I think of a clown car situation, or like one of those movies where like the rich lady has like 18 pieces of luggage that they just keep unloading in. He's like, okay. And then they just keep loading. He's like, okay. And just more and more. And then finally you see the time passage, the lapse, and he sits there. Now he's got a plate in front of him and he's eating as they're stacking it. The sun setting over the sky. Finally, there's just an insurmountable mountain of fucking opium in front of him. He's like, is that all?
Well, once Elliot realizes just how much opium there was, he's like, fuck, we can't pay these guys for this. Okay, so you guys go ahead and, maybe start heading back. Once you get back there, I'm sure Great Britain will settle up with you. And this is at a time when a trip back to Great Britain is a very, very long span of time.
Like 3 months?
Which, yeah, I mean, 3 months for that. But the biggest issue that Elliot runs into is he's kind of on a literal and metaphorical island because he's the head decision maker over there. So if anything goes wrong, he's the one that has to think quickly. So this whole idea of surrendering this opium was his call.
Self-preservation.
Yeah, the crown wasn't going to be like, yeah, if anything happens, we'll go ahead and cover it. The crown doesn't want that opium back. They have no use for that opium. Mm-hmm. They only have use for the money, and they're sure as shit not going to
supposed to be acknowledging that they're doing this shit with the opium. So the crown is just going to be like, what opium that you fucking lost all our money on?
So Lin tells all of the British ships and the East India Company and everybody, he goes, you guys have to sign this paper right here. This paper states that you will not be bringing any more opium into the country. Charles Elliot's like, fuck you, free trade. We do free trade here. You can't just ban this from happening. And Elliot tells everybody from his faction of Britain not to sign that paperwork. Lin's like, okay, we'll get the fuck out. There were, on the other hand, some Quakers. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Quakers, but Quakers seem pretty fucking cool.
Mm-hmm. They're chill.
Yeah, and
like religious Australians.
Being Quakers, they're like, hey, we don't deal with opium, man. We need to get these imports into you, and we need to take exports out. We're not going to do
pumpkins and potatoes, man.
Yeah. So they go ahead and sign on the dotted line. Lynn's like, okay, well, you guys can come back. The rest of you get the fuck out of here. You're not allowed in Canton anymore. Get out.
You guys are allowed to also leave and commence trade.
So they head down to Macau. And they're hanging out with the Portuguese, and I don't think the Portuguese are probably too friendly with the Brits, but Lin comes down there and he goes, no, get them get them off your island. The Portuguese is like, cool, you want them off too? That works. Hey guys, sorry, you gotta go. Not us. Lin told us to get rid of you guys. So
hey, Lynn saw your boats parked outside our island, and he's like, that doesn't work.
He's not happy. They get pushed out to sea. And on their way back, they need to stop to resupply. Lynn has already told everybody along the shoreline, don't do business with the Brits. They're not allowed to do anything. And they run into a place called Kowloon.
I just see someone riding down the shoreline, riding like
On a
along
horse,
and
yeah.
like on horses, being like, not allowed to do business with the British, and just shouting through each town, like racing the fleet.
I don't even know if it's British. It's probably like, if you see any white people, don't sell them anything. Eventually,
If they talk like this.
yeah, just go ahead and say no. Eventually, when they get to Kowloon, they have no resources left. These boats have women, children, everybody on
families
them.
and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they were traveling. Yeah, the smugglers were traveling. The drug traffickers were running with their families.
Probably not great. They decide that they just need to make a stop to get supplies, food and water and all that stuff. Blaine, being a semi-legitimately decent guy, is like, okay, you can come into town. You can get water, you can get bread, nothing else. You're not shopping for any amenities.
Don't bring anything off your fucking boats.
Yeah. So they let a few of them off in Kowloon. They were drunk. They went into a store. These soldiers were drunk, went into a store, sailors, soldiers, whatever, and ended up getting into a dispute with the shopkeeper, and they killed the shopkeeper. And then I'm sure they hauled ass back to the boat. Mm-hmm. Once they got there and Lynn found out about it, the Chinese were like, you need to give us the guys that killed him. And Elliot's like, I don't trust the way that you're going to do this.
These are British citizens, sir.
Yeah, and I mean, they just killed a guy. What's the worst thing that's going to happen to them? They're going to get executed for killing a guy. Kind of seems like an eye for an eye, how things would have gone back then.
You committed murder, sir.
Uh-huh. But Elliot's like, we'll try him on the ship. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. And then all of a sudden, a couple Chinese junks show up. Chinese junks are like their version of a warship. Something fascinating that I kind of came to realize doing this is the Chinese did have a navy. They were a decent navy, but they were a defensive navy. The Chinese in these junks couldn't travel long distances. They were just built for maybe like a mile or two off of shore.
Yeah, it was more of like like you said, a defense force where they did not have to travel long distances. They were always kind of hugging the shore, protecting their land because they had so much land behind them. They never had to worry about colonizing anything. They had everything they wanted in their own domain.
Yeah.
So the British having to have a history of not only colonization, but defense of that colonization, much more military, long distance-ly inclined. The crazy juxtaposition between the ships and everything with like the canvas sails that the British would use, but then also like the straight supported like slat sails that like the Chinese ships would use. It's kind of a cool look.
Yeah, it definitely is. So you have these junks meeting up with these merchant ships who are also armed for pirates and other things like that. There's a standoff as there's a blockade of these Chinese junks holding them onto shore trying to get these guys. There's some fire exchange between the two ships. Eventually, Elliot runs out of cannonballs, and eventually the Chinese back off, and they go their separate ways. Lin gets a hold of the capital city. He's like, hey, we won. We chased them off. We shot at them. They shot at us. We ended up getting the better of them. They took off. Elliot sends a message back to Great Britain saying, hey, we were just fired on by Chinese ships. There's women and children on these vessels that they fired on. Probably didn't mention anything about the murder, so that's kind of an issue. The other issue is, during this time, some of those ships that had given up their opium had either made communications back with Great Britain or had made it back to Great Britain. And once they showed up there, they're like, okay, we're here. Elliot told us to come to you guys for the payment for the opium. And the British were like, the fuck are you talking about? We're not going to... What? No. Who told you that?
What opium?
Yeah.
Bitch, shut the fuck up about the opium.
So, when the Brits tallied up how much opium was given away, they're like, we don't have the silver to pay these guys for this. There's no way. So we're just not going to do it. And then they end up getting this message that there were British ships that were fired upon by Chinese ships. Coming off of the heels, hot off the heels of the Napoleonic Wars, which were probably the roughest wars to that point that had ever taken place.
For Europe.
In Europe. That was a pretty big deal. Them coming out of it, they came out of it with the kitties titties of a navy. They were the unstoppable force on the waterways in the world. And if you have the Chinese firing on your ships, and you also have a ton of colonies around the world seeing that your navy, which is the superior branch of your fighting force, gets shot at and taken out by the lowly Chinese navy, it could plant some seeds of rebellion in some people's minds.
You're showing weakness. And also, coming off the Napoleonic Wars, you don't really have that much of a lag to let your military prowess get stagnant.
No.
And you're going to have soldiers that are going to be fighting in these wars that served in the Napoleonic Wars. So you have seasoned veterans against basically a country that really hasn't had to go to war with anyone, at least in this capacity and in this manner. The little engagement that happened between Lynn's ships and Elliot ships, September 1839. That's kind of the official start date for the first Opium War, first engagement. By May of 1840, so roughly 9 months later, that's when the British are like, okay, we're assembling and we're sending our navy over. In June, and I guess this is why it takes 3 months, in June 1840, basically the British fleet arrives off Macau because they know at that point it's still held by, the Portuguese. And so it's someplace that they're not having to immediately get fired at and everything.
Yeah.
They can kind of consolidate. We're getting into the actual, what happens during the war itself. Before that, let's take a bathroom break.
Cool.
Oh my God, Adam. What is that up in the sky? It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's socials! Oh my God. It's faster than Instagram.
That's historically high pod on Instagram.
More powerful than X?
It's historically high, historically HI on X.
Able to leap tall threads in a single bound.
Back to historically high pod on Threads.
And, I guess there's still Gmail, right?
We got that too. That is historically high podcast at gmail.com.
All right, guys, back to the show. All right. So, jumping back, while the Brits are actually on their way, something actually goes down, right?
Yeah, and this is just what we were talking about before. When decisions have to come from, what'd you say, 3 months away?
Yeah.
For a voyage, you have Elliot who's just kind of left to his own devices to try to figure out what to do, because 3 months is a fucking eternity when you don't have any food and you're trying to figure out refuge. Luckily, I think the Philippines had been taken at this point, so there was a port to where they could go kind of hang out at. But October 1839, I believe it was, the Brits make their way back into Macau and Macau. They move into the Pearl River Delta, and there was actually just a merchant ship that wasn't really involved with the British. I think he was a Quaker. Goes ahead, gets inside, drops his stuff off, and as he goes to leave, there is a British blockade holding him in this Pearl River Delta. And their idea is basically, well, I told all of you guys not to trade in here, and you came in here. We're going to make sure that nobody else gets in.
We can't have it. You can't
exactly,
have it.
yeah. So as this blockade is happening, there's another merchant ship that rose up called the Royal Saxon. The Royal Saxon is a British ship, and that's what makes this so fucking weird. Is this British ship was rolling up to go ahead and drop these imports off, and the royal merchants are holding them up in this blockade from getting in there. It scared the Chinese enough to where they actually sent war junks out to try to get in the way of this merchant ship.
Like the guys that's still allowed to be doing what he should be doing.
And the British, yeah. They wanted to protect the guys that agreed to play by their rules. Mm-hmm. So the British do what they do best, and they go ahead and start firing shots at a British merchant ship. The British start firing shots at a British merchant ship. Just a very odd way of doing business.
When he says a British ship, it doesn't necessarily mean like a Royal Fleet ship.
No.
It's a ship that is a private merchant, but when you are a ship, you fly your country's flag. So it is a ship probably registered in Britain, I think is what the distinction was. It was a ship registered in Britain.
So the Chinese end up protecting a British merchant ship. There's shots fired between them. In the end, there were 4 junks that were sunk. Both of them are treated. The exact same thing happens again. Lynn's forces come back. They're like, hey, we won. Elliot goes back. He's like, send some more word over to Great Britain. We won again. So both of them kind of feel like they have a handle on the situation. And by the time the Brits show up with their navy, Parliament had gone back and forth debating this whole entire thing to go. The biggest issue was all of these reports about this opium had made it back to Britain. And it wasn't a complete British choice to say, hey, we need to make this happen. There were voices in Parliament that were like, what are we doing?
Yeah,
We're sending drugs into China?
Yeah, this is one of those situations that we talk about where it's when you talk about like a country, you mean essentially the leadership of the country that's kind of allowing or allowing this to happen. It's kind of the same thing when you talk about like Germany during World War II. Is there were people, and I can't wait to fucking do that episode about like the resistance within Germany, like the Belgian resistance and all that kind of stuff. You had these people that when they did have voices, because technically Britain wasn't within a hostile fucking police state. You had people that were in positions of power being like, "We're into what? Yeah. This is how we're fucking getting our shit. Is we don't even do that shit here." And of course they're fucking pissed off. We have no right to flood that shit and try to ruin another country. And it seems so not what am I trying to say? Relevant today, because it's the same fucking argument that we're still having today about stuff.
Well, and the tough thing too is it is majority rules. And majority rules doesn't mean that is the will of an entire country. Just like you were talking about Germany, although I suspect, personal beliefs, I don't think there was a lot of Germany that was pushing away. But at the same time, in Great Britain, if a parliamentary vote has 400 votes and it's 215 to 185, majority wins.
Yeah.
Those 185 people were still dissenters. They still didn't want to go fire on the Chinese for opium that was illegal that they were bringing into their country. Like they literally were like, no, we don't want to do this. But unfortunately, they were 15 votes short of making it okay not to do it.
Think of it too from the standpoint of like just British sailors that are serving in the Navy. Like, what do you think that was like being like, we got to fucking go where? They're sending us to fucking China, 3 months there, and then we have to fight, and then we got to come through and hope we're going to make the voyage home over what? And, they were giving them bullshit. It's to protect trade rights and everything like that, and our ships were fired upon. But at a certain point, that's got to funnel down to just regular enlisted guys and being like, this is actually about opium. They're like, we're fucking over here because of drugs.
And that's where this whole thing is so tough to talk about and not just blame a lot of the British people. Was they chose to go to war. They voted to go to war. Most of the people that voted to go to war were probably a lot of people that had a real financial interest in getting the opium into China. So you don't want to handcuff yourself and cut off your revenue stream by voting not to go try to defend the ships that aren't allowed in China anymore that are selling opium.
Yeah.
So
you had to imagine that was during Parliament. They're like, okay, I know not everyone's crazy about this, but here's a graph of how much money this has made us. And you just hear people go, ooh, well,
I don't know if this is going to be right, but again, I got to shoot a shot on this one. I believe it was 1/6 of the silver brought into Great Britain annually was through the trade with China. So through the opium trade, it was like 1/6 of their economy. Of course, you don't want to cut out 1/6 of the money that you're making. And that's financial reasons aside. That just seems it's still nuts, but that's a lot of money you have invested in something so illegal.
All right, so back to June when the Brits arrive off Macau. They don't really waste a lot of time. Basically, they just kind of make a pit stop there, and they go about bombarding this place called, is it Dinghai?
I think so.
Dinghai. Essentially, it's I think it was a city on the river that led up to Canton or within that delta, that kind of gulf.
Yeah.
Where all of those port towns were. And with the British fleet going against this relatively less advanced Chinese fleet and everything, all of these engagements are coming up for the Brits. They're fighting in their element.
And it's not even close.
No.
The Chinese actually did believe that if they could get British troops on the soil, that they could win and kick their asses, which they probably would have had a better chance. But again, you're going through a bunch of soldiers that just went through the military industrial revolution to where their weapons are even so much further advanced. No matter what you do out there, it's still going to be a better gun.
We have talked about that so many times. Coming off war is when the most advancement happens, or during war. All of this stuff being developed during the Napoleonic Wars is now being applied to a country that is not light years, but like not even close to on par with them. Mm-hmm. You have, the Brits sending over, I think, was it a steamship? It was an ironclad steamship. Now
the HMS Nemesis.
That's right. And it had a shallow draft, basically, which means the hull of the boat essentially doesn't go as deep, which makes it able to go up rivers that are going to be shallower. And because it's a steamship, it can propel itself up rivers. Well, you're like, well, what is one ship going to do? Well, first of all, it's an ironclad ship with fucking cannons, so pretty much nothing that the Chinese can fire at it are going to sink it. Second thing it can do is, because it's under its own power, these other ships, as part of the British Navy, they call them ships of the line. Think of like your man of war. A man of war ship, for I guess a movie reference, is if you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean, the ship that the little annoying East India Trading Company guy sits on that's got like all the 3 rows of cannons. I think they had something in the neighborhood of, per side, it was something like maybe like 20 cannons to 25.
A lot.
And that's on each broadside. This fucking Nemesis would tow these ships of the line up so it's not just going by itself. Yeah. It could then position them. Along this area, you also have the Chinese, which, because they are protecting these waterways, they've built forts along it. And still at the same time, you have a stationary fort with, fortifications, and you're still getting beat by these ships coming up the river just because they're that much better.
Well, just to kind of show the separation between what the Nemesis was and the Chinese had. One of the great defenses of the Chinese were to light rafts on fire and then push them towards the boats in the water. So, if you have an iron-hulled ship...
Iron doesn't burn, last time I checked. It can get hot.
Well, you're just praying that it runs into one of the sides of one of the wooden ships and it just lights the ship on fire.
The part that's been submerged in the water. And,
yeah. That's the whole idea behind the defenses that you have. So this Nemesis rolling in, being ironclad, being this, I think it's called a shallow bow, where you can actually go up shallow draft. You can go up river. So as soon as you get into this Pearl River Delta, you lay waste to whatever the city was.
Danghai
that they hit. You got to end up growing up the river, because this whole Cantonese system that they created, this Canton system that they created, was to try to keep all of the people in the south and keep them away from the kingdom in the north.
So think of it from a geographical standpoint. You basically have the area where all of the supplies would be dropped off, to where there's not an outflow, where it's still an ocean, to where you're able to sell yourself into a port and set up there. Once you get to the point of going further into China, you're all going against these river currents. That's almost a defense in itself.
Yeah.
That's why they would have them unload all of this cargo where they could essentially get to, and then all of it would be distributed by land.
And then smaller boats that can cruise up the river will be stopping off at these fort cities and dropping their supplies off, heading up to the capital city.
And so now that advantage is completely gone due to this steamship. It didn't take long. I mean, they took over Dinghai, and kind of seeing the writing on the wall of how this was going, it didn't take long for China to basically kind of capitulate. And this is where we get, unless you had anything before 42.
No.
So we get to 1842 and the treaty, your favorite fucking word.
Yeah.
The Treaty of Nanjing.
Well, we gotta, so Nanjing was like the final step, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
We have a pre-treaty treaty. The pre-treaty treaty took place between Elliot and a guy named Chishan that was the replacement for
Lin,
yeah. Lin fucked up. He kind of started this whole thing by burning the opium and not giving them any money for it. Did get rid of the opium. Bad deal.
That's not fucking up.
No.
Oh my God.
That's
like when a drug bust happens and they're burning all the shit in the pit and the drug dealer's standing there next to the fucking D agent being like, so you're going to like pay me for this stuff, right? Like, it's not supposed to fucking be there.
No, but he also did bring war to your country.
But whoever's looking at it from that perspective, I mean, I can see after this how there would be blame on that because this is what caused the whole thing.
Yeah.
But he was doing his job. And he was doing it pretty fucking well, too.
Yeah.
His mission was to get rid of the opium and stop it. He's like, I found a bunch of opium. I fucking destroyed it. What do you want?
So
I'm not the one that said we were paying these motherfuckers for
yeah,
it.
that's true. That was Elliot's fault. Elliot, the man who was at fault, and this guy named Chishan get together, and they hammer out this treaty to stop it from happening. And this had an indemnity, which was the payment of the drugs that were seized, the opium that was seized, to cover that. And then they also wanted a place where they can offload, just like Macau. And he asked for this little group of desolate islands called Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong was like nothing back at this time. There was like a few fishing villages on a couple rocks. That's really all Hong Kong was.
So is this part of the pre-treaty? Because I was reading that this was part of the Treaty of Nanjing as well.
It
so
is.
I don't... Okay, it is?
Yeah, it's
okay.
just... So what happens after this, they sign the treaty, they split. Elliot goes back home to Great Britain, and he's like, hey, guess what I did? I went ahead and I scored us all the money for all the opium that I promised that we would pay these guys. And at the same time, I got us this sweet-ass place called Hong Kong.
Hong Kong Island.
Hong Kong Island, yeah.
Again, geographically, Hong Kong is actually an island in the South China Sea. It does not connect to the mainland. And kind of in the same way they did that with Macau, which is an island, they're basically like, well, they're not actually technically attached to the Chinese mainland.
Yeah.
It's just some, and again, this is a barren rock that I don't even think supported like a fishing village.
I think they had a couple villages, but that was it.
And they're just like, no, they're offshore. They're not on the mainland. We can keep them there because we have this defense fleet. And, you know, we're giving them a token gesture, which nowadays, this also explains why the British had control of Hong Kong up until what, the 90s?
When they finally turned 78, I want to say.
When they turned it back over?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, this is the origination of why the British had Hong Kong as a territory.
Look that up.
So
when the switch was, look it up.
Okay.
So Elliot is talking to the British, and he's like, hey, I got Hong Kong, I got this indemnity. They go, well, how much is the indemnity? He tells me, he goes, that's not enough to cover what they stole and burned. You didn't even do that right. Why we don't want Hong Kong. What does that do? You had them on the ropes, and you could have driven all the way to the capital city and had anything that you wanted. And that was all you got out of it. He's like, no, I think I got a pretty good deal. They're like, no, you left us a bill still, and you just got us Hong Kong. That was it. You could have taken so much more, and that's all you got out of them. So Elliot gets fired because he didn't produce a good enough treaty. Meanwhile, Chishan goes back to Hong Kong, or goes back to Beijing, and he tells them what he did, and they're like, you gave up a bunch of our money, and you gave them Hong Kong? Mm-hmm. That wasn't yours to give. We didn't want that, but if it gets them off their back, I guess it's okay. You're going to be fired for this probably, but we can live with what you did.
So the handover of Hong Kong from the United Kingdom to the People's Republic was July 1st, 97.
Oh, 97.
97, yeah. It ended 156 years of British rule in the former colony, which began in 1841.
That's crazy.
So not only do they end up getting, as a result of the actual treaty, when they go back and actually, don't they end up going back and going further up?
Yeah, so they end up back on the river, and the way that you get to the capital city is there's this thing called the Yangtze River. The Yangtze River runs almost south to north and kind of cuts China in half. You take the Yangtze up. Once you get past the Yangtze, you branch off. It takes you to a bay that's kind of right by Shanghai. As they're moving up the Yangtze, they get to a...
How do they get to Beijing?
By going up the Yangtze, and then they cut down another river to get to the bay.
Okay.
So they can...
Okay, not Shanghai, Beijing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which one is Shanghai?
Shanghai is a port city.
Okay.
It's one of the ones that gets opened up as part of this.
Okay. So, as that goes ahead and happens, they get to a place called Nanjing. And once they get to a place called Nanjing, the royals are like, oh, they're getting real close to where we're going to be. We need to send a delegation down there. And Nanjing used to be the capital of China, the Chinese Empire. So them losing the former capital of the Chinese Empire to the British, not a real great
a real
option.
Stalinberg or
Yeah.
Stalin. Jesus, not Stalinberg.
Stalingrad.
A real Stalingrad situation.
The Nemesis shows up, and
Yeah, we can't slow this thing down. It just keeps. We at this point do not suspect it will stop at Nanjing.
yeah, no. And so once they stop them in Nanjing, they're like, okay, what are your new demands? What do you guys actually want? And the guy that took over for Elliot goes ahead and spills out what he wants. And they're like, good, that's great, awesome. So this gun, Henry Pottinger was this guy's name. And I believe it was Chai Lang, something like that, on the Chinese side, end up hammering out this Treaty of Nanjing. Not the worst thing that's happened in Nanjing, because it's also called Nanking, and come World War II, there is a grape of Nanjing.
Because of the city's both cultural significance and also strategic significance for China, it tends to be a target. And the most memorable being what Adam just referred to, an event that happened in the 1930s during World War II. So, of course, that's going to get its own episode. Not sure how to title that one. But at the end of this, because essentially the Chinese are like, we can't stop this thing. We need to go ahead and put an end to this. You get what basically, again, 42, the Treaty of Nanjing, and is the first of what's known as the unequal treaties. Brits they're not going to be like, no, take Hong Kong back. They're going to, of course, we're still going to take Hong Kong. And what we're going to do is you're going to open an additional 5 cities as trading ports for us. Or not additional, you're going to open a total of 5. They're going to be Shanghai, Canton, which is already the first one, Ningbo, Fuzhou, and Xiamen. Again, I probably butchered the shit out of all those except Shanghai.
They all sounded good.
Or Shanghai.
If you said them with confidence, I feel like you could have passed.
It also is determined that the restitution or the reparations that China is going to pay for the burned opium, $21 million.
Much more than before. The indemnity just rose quite a bit.
And $6 million of that was due immediately, and then they set up a lovely payment plan, a direct deposit type thing to go ahead and pay back the rest. Also, the Brits were to receive equal trade. And at that point, that meant that they would also be trading in goods as well as currency to make sure that there wasn't any trade discrepancy. Which pretty much, at that point, China's like, but what do you guys fucking have? Like, show us the catalog. Let us pick something. Yeah. And at that point, they really can't do shit. The Brits are also exempt from Chinese law. So if they're backdating that, then guess what? Those 2 guys that murdered that guy are off the hook.
Extraterritoriality is what it's called, and this, I think, is probably the worst thing that they get. One of the other things that was easy enough to just for them to charge was like, hey, you guys got to pay for all of our ships being occupied here. You got to pay for the war that we waged against you, which is what we did to Germany in World War II that got them pretty pissed off. So you can imagine back then this would have hurt too. But this extraterritoriality, means that they can do whatever they want in China.
Basically, it would be the example, I guess one of the easier ones, is some guy could have his brother killed by someone that's British, go to his local law enforcement or his governor or whatever, and basically be like, yeah, these guys killed my brother, and they're like, sorry, we can't do anything due to that little first Opium War and them getting that, what was it called?
Extraterritoriality.
Yeah, so basically being exempt from Chinese law.
Well, the belief by the Brits was that Chinese law was going to be way more harsh than British law, so they would be the ones that would charge and then handle the court case.
We'll take care of it, guys, don't worry.
The other thing that they got out of this deal that was bullshit was they were allowed missionaries into these ports. Mm-hmm. And this is where the waterfall effect and where good old the United States of America pokes their head in, because after this Treaty of Nanjing is signed, the Americans are there next and they're like, hey, well, we sell you guys opium too. We want a deal too. Oh, and that was the last thing, it was called like the best deal exclusivity or something like that for Great Britain, which meant that any other trade treaty that they would sign would have to
They're a preferred nation.
Preferred nation, that's what it was, would have to be equal to or greater than any other treaty that was signed. They would have to have the exact same benefits or more. So the Americans show up. The Chinese are like, you guys are mad too, and you kind of look like the British. Sure. Excuse me.
We already signed a treaty with you guys. So like, we're not. We were. Hold on a second. We were them, and then we fought them. We're not them anymore. We still look like them. Some of us still talk like them, but we're not them. But we're on good terms with them. It's a weird thing.
Would you say that we're like the divorced uncle last night?
Yeah.
And then you get the French that roll in, and the French are like, hey, we would also like a treaty as well. Like,
are you handing out treaties? We've signed so many.
Why do you talk so much funnier than the other guys that talk funny? What the fuck's wrong with you? Like, oh, we are the French. And they're like, okay, whatever. Just, we'll go ahead and fill this out. There's a blank line. Just write in whatever country
you're from. Are there any
from.
other white people that need a fucking treaty?
Turns out there was. Because the Swedish and the Norwegians show up and get themselves one just like
hello. We are here to also receive a treaty for all of our goods and services, yeah? We make modular furniture.
You got to draw a line somewhere, though, right? Like, there's enough white people that just got treaties. Somehow the Belgians show up, and the Belgians are like,
I don't know what Belgian accent is.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I could think Bavarian, but not Belgian.
So the Belgians show up, and the Chinese are like, who are you? Like, we're the guys that make the fluffy waffles. Like, waffles fucking suck. No treaty for you.
Yeah. Waffles suck. Crepes rule. Beat it.
So the Belgians are the only ones that don't get this treaty that show up.
So along with all of this happening, you also, we come to a period where the actual first one is over, and there's kind of a relative, I don't want to say peace, because now the British just get to really pretty much run roughshod and do whatever they want to do. Opium is still a huge fucking deal. It's still fucking going on, which is why it leads to a second war. And in 1853, there's a Taiping rebellion that's going on in North China. And with the capital being in North China, that's kind of drawing a lot of the attention, probably takes a little bit of the attention off what the British are doing, making it easier to bring opium into the country.
I believe they set up shop in Nanjing, too.
Did they? So they're even fucking closer.
Yeah. And, again, the former Chinese capital.
And here's the thing, too, is they're no longer just like focused on this one point where they can keep shit. Not only do they have Hong Kong, which is technically now their sovereign territory, they can just ship whatever they want to fucking Hong Kong and then take it to 5 other fucking ports that are further along in the country where they have a larger customer. So, I mean, it's still a huge issue, and it's probably actually even getting bigger at this point.
Oh, yeah.
The new emperor, or there was a new imperial, I think, commissioner, this guy named Yi Mingchen, and is basically sent to Canton and is given the same job as Lin, and is basically like, get rid of the fucking opium. This shit is still an issue. And in October of 1856, he actually seizes a British registered ship called the Arrow. What?
So this ship, got to talk about this ship. This ship was a supposed British ship that...
British registered. Again, there's a distinction because it could be registered, but it can never make port in Britain.
Registration had expired. So, we don't know exactly what was going on when this ship...
Pirates.
Yeah, when this ship gets boarded, all the guys working on this British registered ship that were below deck, Chinese. That seems kind of odd. When they take the Arrow... everybody that was on the Arrow and all the people that were supporting the Arrow, probably the rest of the smuggler ships, were like, well, they weren't allowed to do that because they were flying the British flag.
The Union Jack.
Chinese are like, it wasn't flying the Union Jack. We didn't see that shit. I don't know what you're talking about. And we found a bunch of Chinese people working down below deck. So there's a great chance that this is a smuggling ship that you guys are trying to get this opium back in. Mm-hmm. The British are like, whoa, we signed a treaty.
Easy,
Let's relax a little bit.
Let's not be throwing around the word opium.
Mm-hmm. So, we just turned this whole thing right back around. After this relative peace that they had besides the internal strife that's going on in China, all of a sudden there's a political crisis that happens back in Britain where I think they had to call like a parliamentary election because there was a fight as to why do we have to go back to war in China again? What are you guys still doing over there? And they're like, they seized one of our ships. Somebody's like, well, we heard that the Chinese found a bunch of opium on the ship. They're like, no. They seized one of our ships. I don't think you guys get that.
Was it one of our ships? And when they said China, or not Chinese registered, British registered, my brain is clicking into conspiracy mode, of course. How hard would it be for people in the right positions to just forge a registration?
Not hard.
And be like, oh no, see, I got it. And there's like ink dripping off it. And it's like, see, this thing has been registered for a very, very long time.
Not only that, how are they going to be reading these things?
Yeah.
It's not like document forging was real tough back then.
So the crew of the Arrow ends up getting arrested. And I did hear about some torture stuff that they did to some of these guys, which was pretty, I didn't think about how it would work.
Inventive, I would say.
So they would wet ropes, and then they would bind these guys with wet ropes, like completely around their bodies. Well, when rope is wet, it stretches, and as it dries out, it constricts. So basically, they would be wrapped tight with wet rope, and as it dried and constricted them, it would squeeze them so tight that it could break bones and pop your skin and all that kind of shit.
That's tough.
That's fucking... Here's the thing, is, and of course it'll be discussed during future episodes when we get into like fucking Iwo Jima and like the fucking battles between Japan and China, but fucking torture and shit seems to be a very refined thing in the Asian South Pacific area. There seems to be an excellence in the field of fucking torture, of thinking of fucked up ways to hurt people.
I think it's... excuse me. Torture, I think, is better in Asia. I think killing is better in Europe. Because drawing and quartering somebody's pretty intense.
Yeah.
But that's killing them.
That's true. And also, they've just kind of stuck with it. They don't really get creative in their methods. It's like, you know what it is? It's that stuffy European aristocratic thing of being like, our torture methods have never failed us. Why change now? And then in Asia, they're just like, this made me think of this other shit. We can shove shit under their fingernails.
Yeah. They're like artisans.
Yes.
They look at shit and they're like, man, do you see how much longer the rope is when it's wet when we pull it in as opposed to when we throw it out? Mm-hmm. You think if we tied somebody up with that, it would do something real bad to them? And like, I don't know. Let's try it.
Yeah. So word gets back to the governor of Hong Kong, who's British, of course, because it's Hong Kong. And his name is Sir John Bowring. And basically ends up calling in the East India Company fleet. I'm guessing probably because they were also maybe closer.
Yeah.
And essentially, East India Fleet comes in. They start bombarding and capturing forts all along the Pearl River, leading up to, I keep saying either am I saying Canton now? Canton. And
yeah, you nailed it. Canton.
Yeah, Canton. And basically sail up to Canton during this, because with the local populace, they're like, fuck, they're bombing our town and they're, trying to take us over. A riot breaks out in Canton and a bunch of the European factories are burned down. So the locals are like, you want this shit? Is it what you're coming for? And they go to put the torch to it.
Yeah, but along the way to get there, too, there's a rebellion in India that they got to go put down.
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe that's why they had to call on the East India Company, because they no longer had control really in India. That wasn't their issue anymore.
Yeah.
So instead of Britain, which is probably putting resources into quelling this thing in India, maybe not the availability and kind of the timeliness that the governor needed. And of course, because the East India Company is like, yeah, of course, we'll do this, but we're going to want some concessions as well. There probably wasn't a lot of fucking difficulty in convincing them.
You also had the tagalongs that are over there too. And the tagalongs are everybody that you would think, and then one player that is just a sneaky son of a bitch. So the French won in on it when they hear that Britain's going back over to war. They're like, hey, what are you guys doing? What are you loading the boats for? Like, we got to go back to China.
War? We doing war? Yeah. War?
They're like, oh, what are you guys going to do in China? They're like, we got to open the trade route again. They stole one of our boats. Like, oh, well.
They still don't want our opium. The fuck?
Yeah. French are like, we're coming too. Like, what business do you have? You guys got the treaty. Shut up. They go, well,
Did you not hear? One of our missionaries was executed. We must go avenge him. Well, what was he doing? He was touching the children. For God.
It was either touching children or they were allowed in the port cities. The one that they were going over to try to defend was found well inside of mainland China. Mm-hmm. And that was the deal, was you don't go beyond the port cities to spread your Christianity. I can't really foul the Chinese on this point. I kind of waffled back and forth. But if it's your choice to try to keep a religion out of your country, and maybe not go in and pollute their minds.
Listen,
it's
Jacques, we told you, don't fucking... If you can't see the ocean, Jacques, don't fucking go there.
Don't start preaching the good word to the people that you see.
So along the way, after France joins in, I mean, if we've learned anything about global conflicts that involve multiple countries, is that once you open the floodgates, other countries are like, oh, is there something to be gained here?
Yeah.
So United States, not to be left out, sends some troops over and some ships. And then Russia also joins in. But Russia does this weird thing because of its positioning to like the north and the west of China.
Yeah.
It has to do this weird kind of dance of like, hey, we're your buddies. We're trying to help you out with this thing. And is this kind of where we start to get the introduction of maybe ears perking up for Marxism or anything?
This still would have been Tsarist Russia.
Okay.
So we haven't quite gotten to that yet. But there was always something sneaky about it because the Russians go ahead and show up in this envoy with the Americans, the French, and the British. Mm-hmm. But when they show up, they're like, hey, man, I know these guys kind of suck. And I know that they're kind of messing with you. They play both sides so well that they end up getting like a chunk of Siberia that China just gives them.
I see it as this, like they all, show up. There's three of them. The fucking American is dressed as a cowboy. The Brit has one of those big Buckingham Palace hats on. And the fucking Russians are...
Moleskin hat
or some shit. And as they... the American and the British leave, the Russian guy turns to leave, and then he just kind of slowly holds back for a second, just leans over and he's like, listen... I'm with these guys, but I'm not really with these guys. And honestly, I think you make some great points here. Yeah, opium? Ugh, yucky. Why would you want that here in your country? So why don't we try to help each other out a little bit here? And they end up doing a fucking excellent job because no hostilities against them from the Brits or the Americans, yet they still gain the benefits without really having to do anything from China.
Yeah.
And this I feel like this kind of opens that possibility of suggestion and influence that Russia is going to eventually have over China.
Yeah, it opens a line of communication between them. So, like you were talking about, ships and troops go ahead and mobilize. They're sent to China, put down the rebellion in India. Once China hears about just how far up the Yangtze they're getting again, shit, they're headed back this way.
Now all their fucking boats are made of metal.
They end up, I believe it was, when was it?
The treaty?
Yes.
So 1858 we come to, because again, there's no stopping these forces. They're kind of shit out of luck. Not enough time has passed for them to try to reach any type of like comparative parity with these powers at this point. They only let like a gap of 8 years had happened between the two wars or something. So at this point too, the British, they're pushing for part of their conditions here are going to be for the legalization of opium. At this point, it's not even a fucking secret anymore.
They're just going to nip that one in the bud.
They're just going to be like, listen, we know what this is really fucking about, so we're just going to go ahead and address the elephant in the room. So 1858, the treating of, is it Tianjin?
Tianjin.
Tianjin is signed. And China, of course, you got to pay those reparations. And also, you know what? Why don't we just double the amount of ports open? Let's just go ahead and make it 10 ports that are open, because guess what? We got a lot of stuff that we're bringing in. We got equal trade now. Remember, you got to buy all our shit, and we'd like to go ahead and bring it into more places. Also, guess what? The opium trade, we're just going to go ahead and make that legal. It's been causing too many headaches. We're just going to let it happen. And guess what? If it's not meant to be in your country, it'll just fade out. I'm sure if we would have left it legal in Britain, it would have we already would have been out of it. It would have been a little fad. It'll probably last for 5 more years, and you guys will be rid of this pesky opium thing.
Well, and I think there's something in this too where I don't know if history slants this one way or the other, but there was a belief that everybody on the way up to the emperor was the reason that opium wasn't legal. And so every single time they'd signed a treaty before, they tried to push their diplomats closer and closer to the capital city and being in Beijing. Well, now that they're on the outskirts of Beijing in Tianjin, like, we just need diplomats in here so we can go straight to the emperor. That way we can just go ahead and cut out all the people that don't like what we're doing, because I'm sure the emperor will be okay. I don't think that was ever that way.
Yeah, why? You know what? I think the reason that this is causing an issue is because of a lack of communication. So we should be in a position where we're able to directly communicate with the emperor and avoid these wars. Who wants a third Opium War? We sure don't. No. And we can't have a third Opium War if it's legal. We'll have to fight over something else. Part of the conditions as well, and these are the ones that I think opium being made illegal, the tin port access, the reparations, that all kind of seems like what they were pushing for the first time.
Yeah.
These are the things, the next, three things that I'm going to discuss that I think, or two things that I'm going to discuss, had the biggest impact, even lasting up to today. And it probably explains a lot of the resentment that they have against Western countries. They were to grant foreign traders and missionaries the rights to travel within China. So whereas you were just able to kind of quarantine that type of stuff to the coast in certain cities, pretty much all of China is now kind of at the whim. And due to your previous treaty that you had, which is still in effect, guess what? All those British are exempt from all your laws, regardless of where they're at throughout your entire country. That's an insane level of I know there's diplomatic immunity for certain shit, but to literally have anyone that is just like, oh yeah, I'm a traitor. Like, what were the qualifications and how hard was it to be a traitor? Or I'm a missionary. And
There's
you
zero qualifications to be a missionary.
Yeah, and you can just now travel throughout someone else's country, basically not having to follow their rules. And in order to make sure that, we're going to make sure they don't break too many rules, but just to help them along the way, what we're going to do is we're actually going to change your rules a little bit closer to us. So basically, due to the influx of these diplomats, like you were saying, they basically bend China to the Western diplomatic methods. So now, guess what? We don't even have to adhere to your, cultural, not taboos, but cultural methods or cultural procedures
norms
here in your own fucking country. We're just going to make it to where you have to do the things the way we're going to do them. And this thing fucking goes through. There's no choice. They have to fucking sign this. And basically, well, I mean, what else are they going to do? At this point, what do they think they can do?
They gave it a try. Because after the guys went ahead and signed the Treaty of Tianjin and they bring it back to the Empire, or the Emperor for his signature, the Empire just spits on it. He's like, no.
The Emperor was like a 30-year-old dude. At that point, he's like, fuck. What are you guys Are you guys fucking smoking opium? Like, are you fucking kidding me?
And why didn't you just give them the keys to the Forbidden City?
You basically did.
Yeah, maybe let's not do this. But when they left Tianjin, they're like, okay, so next year you guys are going to show up with your diplomats and everything like that. The British are like, yep, we'll see you this time next year. We're going to be in here. They go back, they talk to the Emperor. The Emperor's like, that's not happening. Sorry. Do not pass go. This isn't the deal. We got to make sure that when they come back in a year, we're prepared.
Hold on, Your Excellency. You want to wait till they come back to tell? Shouldn't we maybe tell them, since we're reaching this decision now? We could send someone down and inform them that. He's like, nah, we'll let them know when they come back. I don't know if it was a stalling thing, because if he's like, well, if they don't know that we didn't sign this or I didn't agree to this, they're going to take all their soldiers and ships for the most part and probably take them back, at least depleting some of their forces, not leaving as large of a force here. And maybe at that point we could, cause some trouble. If I tell them now, no one's fucking leaving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We need some time to gather some rocks, some boulders, some things we can
burned
load
up all
cannons.
of our boats.
Yeah.
Trying to crash them in. We need to figure out a new method.
Year goes by. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. This is,
Year goes by. We get to June 1859, the Second Battle of Taku Forts. The first battle was them rolling into, I believe, outside of Tianjin and cleaning house. When they go through Taku Forts, everything kind of looks like it was the way that they left it. There weren't a whole lot of troops around. It just kind of looked normal. I think they said there were grass
Yeah, so like the fort is a fort on the river, so it has firing position, but as they're sailing past it, usually what you would see for like the open gun ports, like you're looking at something, you see like a dark recess, you're like, that's obviously where a fucking gun goes. Everything, it looked like they boarded up shop.
Yeah.
Like when someone leaves for a hurricane, you put all the shutters on the windows. It basically kind of looked like that. So they're sailing by it. He looks over, there's just, slats on the gun ports and everything. Looks back, and then all of a sudden he hears this boom. And he turns and looks at the fort again, and all the slats are dropped, and there's just fucking cannons pointed at this fucking fleet.
Well, and I believe they pulled an old Byzantine trick, and they chained up the river.
Yep.
To stop the boats.
That's what the boom was.
Yeah.
When it hit the boom, they had all hit the chain, and they're like, the fuck are we stopping for? Well, at this point, because they're stopped in location, they can zero in, and this guy, he was a Mongol general named, was it...
Senji Linchen.
Senge Linchen launches a surprise attack on 21 ships.
I didn't even think about this until I heard this probably a couple times. He's a Mongol?
Yeah. Mongolia was part of China, I believe. This is at a time
general?
well past... Yeah, because at that point, man, enough time had passed to where Mongolia had been with China that it was just, you were Chinese. You were just from like a different province within, like you could be Manchurian, right? But you're still Chinese.
Okay, yeah. So the wall was there, but the wall was just symbolic.
You can be Cantonese, but it's your the area in which we're from our state, but we're within the larger country.
Okay.
This guy was a fucking badass, though.
Yeah. Launched a surprise attack on these 21 ships. There were 2,200 British troops that were at the mouth of the high river where these Taku forts were, and they just absolutely smoked the British. Just took them by surprise, pants down, no guns loaded, anything like that, and they just started raining hellfire down on these ships.
You literally have them all stopped because they can't really turn around. You at least have them forced. You've already sighted in that section, and the targeting for that, and all you're doing. And it would take a lot of cannonballs to fucking sink some of these ships, but they damaged enough of them to where the British were like, "We got to get the fuck out of here."
We can't.
No, there's this fucking chain. We're not. This isn't a steamship.
Can't just throw this in reverse and go the other way. Some of these are powered by wind. So the Americans somehow always end up in this position where, God damn it, I hate doing this because I don't always like taking credit for shit, and I always bang us for taking credit on things that we kind of have a less hand in. But the American ships that were behind go ahead and save what was left of the British ships that came through. They pull in behind them, start pulling ships away. All the guys that had abandoned their ship end up getting on the American ships. They go ahead and haul ass back the other way, back down the river, and end up saving the day somehow for these French and British.
Look here, it's a bunch of soggy Tommies. Get them in the fucking boats.
So, what do? We go back for a year, and we figure some new shit out. We maybe bring over some more of those weapons that we had stashed back away, some of the things that we really break out the big guns for. I think they were, I don't remember what kind of guns they were called, but I think it was a precursor to a machine gun.
Okay.
That they had used.
Like a Gatling version or repeaters, like
something like that.
Because they did have those in the fucking Civil War, so they've been refined at this point.
Yeah. So, those go ahead and show up, and when those go ahead and show up, everything goes real wrong. They pull back through Taku and just blow the shit out of Taku. They march on Tianjin again.
Do you think they had the slats up at Taku this time? Like, it worked once. What's the worst it's going to do? They're like, nope, we're not even going to wait till we get up past this. We're just going to bomb this shit as we're approaching it.
Hey, man, they're bringing back more guns. What do you think we should do? You think we should move the chain further down the river to try to stop them sooner?
Then we can't hit them with our cannons.
Yeah, there's a certain range we can only stop them at. So they blast their way all the way through to the outer walls of Beijing. They are right on the capital city. And they finally slow down for a little bit. They had blown through Lin Chan's squad, taking him back out, so kind of got a little payback for him running them off a year earlier. Like, well, I mean, do we want to take the Forbidden City?
And the Forbidden City It's in Beijing. So essentially think of the Forbidden City as the Emperor's complex. Within it, it's a Vatican City, how it's inside of Rome. Kind of same thing. It's fucking gorgeous to look at. If you haven't seen a picture of it, I know I always make fucking movie references, but that's how my mind works. Shanghai Noon is the first one, I think.
Yeah.
That's where Jackie
Shanghai
Chan
Night's
is
the
from.
second one.
Yep, Jackie Chan is from the
Hong
Forbidden
Kong.
City.
Oh, in the movie.
In the movie, that's where
Okay,
he's
yeah,
from.
yeah.
And it's like where you see sometimes in movies, like all of like the guards like training all in unison out in the giant courtyards. It's to fucking lay eyes on this thing in real life would be amazing. Japanese Board of Tourism, please invite us out there.
Chinese.
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh my god.
Either way, we're cool going either way.
Yeah, we'll go either places. We can do like a cross country type tour thing.
Oh, there's no greater insult.
Oh, we're not getting invited.
That's fucking awesome. I don't think we were anyway, but
Okay.
you know what? Maybe not. But
I brought great dishonor on our podcast.
if you occupy the Forbidden City and this occupation happens, there's a reason why you look at this situation. You're like, well, why don't we just take them over and colonize them again? But you just have a giant country of India that you just colonized,
And you had problems.
and you had problems.
Now let's get a second one.
Yeah.
That's bigger. That's
Already rife with uprisings.
and that's further. Because that's gonna fucking work.
Maybe we don't take them over. Maybe
No.
we don't colonize China. Maybe we leave them in charge of their problems and then just kind of run them like a puppet.
But we take all the good shit about it. That's what they did. Is they basically, instead of taking all the responsibility about being a steward of a country and having to look out for the well-being of the people, they basically said, no, you're still going to do all that shit, but we're just going to have complete freedom and carte blanche to do whatever the fuck we want in your country. So you know what it is? It's the fucking parent in the divorce that just like gets the kids on every other weekend. And so they're just like, they get all the fun. They're like, see them, and they're like, yeah, we're just going to go to the water park and do all that kind of shit. And they don't ever have to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
They just get to do all the fun shit
Yeah.
without any of the responsibility. And
This guy named Harry Park shows up to handle the negotiations of the occupation. And the negotiations go so poorly that the entire British delegation, the Indian forces that were with him, and all the journalists are arrested. So, not good, I think, is how you would call that or say that. So instead of the choice to invade Beijing and go take the Forbidden City and burning it down, they go ahead and decide that they are going to sack the Summer Palace. Had no idea that they had a summer palace. Like, that's an interesting thing. I guess it was like the coolest place in the world. It was actually like their normal residence that they would stay out there more than they would be in the Forbidden City.
yeah, calling it a palace, like in the way of, just addressing it as like a structure and everything. Versailles is in Paris. That's the royal one for the French. So it was like, they said it was like Versailles on steroids. It was basically like Chinese Disneyland before I think there was actually a Disneyland in China. But basically it was a gigantic compound. What?
There's a Disneyland in China?
Yeah. Disney China.
They're cool with the mouse like that they will bring him in?
I'm gonna check to make sure I'm accurate on this.
Wow. I would never think that.
Everyone loves Mickey.
Yeah, they do, but they also censor a lot of our media.
Shanghai Disney, that's what it is. Yeah, Shanghai Disney.
No way.
Dude, they love Marvel. Superheroes.
That's pretty cool.
Star Wars. Fuck, come on.
I would like to... It'd be fun to go to Disney World and then fly straight to Beijing and do the one there.
You mean
and
Shanghai.
Or Shanghai and see the differences.
Yeah.
Like,
It's probably cool as fuck. Yeah. Like the different food choices they have and it's different rides and everything.
okay. Back on track, sorry.
Okay, so they end up with the Summer Palace. They sack the Summer Palace. Not only do the British do it, like the French fucking do it, they basically loot the thing for fucking everything. There are even these... did you see the thing about the stone or the bronze animal busts? Mm-mm. So there were 12 of these like elaborately carved bronze animal heads, like a bull, and I don't know if they all went along with like zodiac symbology or anything like that.
Chinese New Year, maybe?
I think it might have been like that, but there was a bull, there was 12 different animals.
I think those are zodiacs too.
All of them were looted. They've actually gotten back, I think, like 8 or 9 of them. because they were taken like by different private collectors all over the world, and they were able to collect that, at least that many, which is fucking insane considering that all of them were taken.
Yeah, that's more than I would have guessed they got back.
Yeah, like I could see like one, like, oh, thank God you got one of them back. But they basically, and if you've ever, I don't know if you can still get renditions of like artist interpretations or like actual, like based on descriptions, what the Summer Palace looked like. But if the emperor is spending most of their time there, it had to be just fucking amazing. And it was torched.
Yeah, gonna be real sweet. What do you think the worst thing would be that you could loot from? Take cultural stuff out of there. What would be the worst thing that you could loot from a royal palace? Just from anybody, really. What's the most innocent, sweet thing?
Oh, the fucking dogs.
Yeah. So I believe they're called Pekingese, something like that. They're kind of a smaller dog.
Yeah, I think most people have heard about a Pekingese.
Okay. I don't know if I could draw one for you. It's a small dog. I think it kind of looks like a little lion, maybe.
Maybe like
Bug eyes.
a Yorkie pug.
Okay.
Like hair like a Yorkie, face like a pug, some shit like that.
They go ahead and they steal these puppies, and they divvy them up between these soldiers that stole them. One of the soldiers goes ahead and heads back to Great Britain, and Queen Victoria, I believe it was, is on the throne, and he gives Queen Victoria one of these puppies as her portion of the loot.
I bring you a puppy, Your Majesty.
Oh, he's so cute. What should we name him?
Oh, what did they name him?
Looty.
That's right. Fuck!
They named the loot that they got from China Looty.
Looty?
I mean...
Looty, eat your food.
Hey, I feel like we're really grinding in on the Brits, and I know that for some reason in my head we've sounded very pro-China, and I think up till before communism started, we should have been pro-China. They seemed like fairly nice folks before this happened. I'm sure they probably committed some atrocities then that are not going to look good that I said that. But that's pretty tough to steal puppies and then give one to the Queen, and the Queen calls him Looty. Yeah. That's the most disrespectful shit.
Yeah.
It's awful.
So the emperor has fled at this point to the north and basically is like, hey, so there's, I got to take care of some stuff up north, business related stuff.
They stole my fucking puppies.
Yeah, asked his younger brother, and is basically like, you're good to hold stuff down here, water the plants, take care of the Forbidden City. You got all kinds of like helpers, butlers. You'll be good.
Hey, what do I do about the British folks outside the city?
They're probably not going to do anything. It's cool. Hey, we'll figure it out. You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right. So eventually the treaty was finally signed because this didn't fucking work out. Some additional concessions were added, and the Treaty of Nanjing is basically considered the start of what's known as the Century of Humiliation in China, the 1840s to the 1950s. Because again, this shit is so far-reaching. Just think like the 1950s, and it's used kind of as a springboard for, well, not kind of. It's used as a springboard for the Communist Party takeover by Mao Zedong, and just looking at it from, man, it's the playbook has been used repeatedly. It's not quite a Hitler thing, but in the methods in which Hitler took a country and was like, we're so fucking down right now.
Yeah.
Like, the emperor has not been working out. He's led you into nothing but ruin. Why not? Are we going to fuck it up even more? No, we have a plan to fix this. We're going to get rid of the fucking opium that's been a fucking problem in our country. And they've been telling us, we're going to get rid of it. We're going to get rid of it. We're going to, stop the British from having so much control here. And eventually when things get bad enough, you're looking for any avenue of change that you can find. And this is kind of how communism puts its foot in the door and starts whispering sweet nothings into the people's ear. By the early 20th century, we're talking 19s?
Yeah, 1900s, the aughts.
I don't know why I cannot fucking grasp this thing. Just call it the 19th century. It's 19 to 20. It's the 19th.
But
when we're telling time and it's 5 o'clock, do you say it's 6 o'clock minus something? No. You say it's 5:15. You don't say it's 6 minus 45. Don't do this to the centuries.
I was thinking about this and I thought I had a grasp on it, and then I just went to say it and realized that I was wrong.
Okay, you don't have to say it.
Well, no.
You want to be
your way would make
documented
sense,
being wrong.
because as you're born, you don't turn 1 until you've been here for a year.
Correct. Whereas technically you're 9 months old. You should technically turn 1, but it's your birthday.
I think even over in China, though, I'm not going to say China. Don't want to pigeonhole myself. In some countries, I think they start at 1. I think when you're born, you're 1, and then as you go into your second year, you're 2. So it's like the years that you're going into.
It makes more sense.
It kind of does.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where you have a very good point about 19th century should be the 1900s, because it's 1900s.
Yeah. So by the early 20th century, the opium trade slowed dramatically. Part of that was probably because there was a lot of other options as well. Oh, sorry about that. And basically, part of it was because if you're gonna have a problem and you're not really able to get rid of it, what do? You just start fucking growing it at home.
Yeah.
You start your own grow operations at home. So the trade itself slowed, but technically use didn't really slow because they were getting it local. And basically with an agreement in 1907 to limit imports, that kind of also slowed it down as well. You could see at this point, they're isolating. At this point, they've been burned so fucking hard that now they're just like, you know what? We don't need your opium anymore. We'll grow our own fucking opium. And then they just started closing themselves off.
Well, part of it too, Britain doesn't really gain a conscience. They've just gained more exports and colonies and other shit.
They don't need the opium anymore at the same time, because guess what? Now they're buying all the shit that had they just bought this before, we would not have to traffic in opium. No. So now they're getting all these other exports and imports basically on parity with China.
Well, they're sending them all around the world too.
Yeah.
China's not their only port of export really beyond anything else in the 20th century.
And then we finally come to essentially making good on the promise that they made when they come to power. The Communist Party ends up banning all of opium in the 1950s.
Yeah. And
which really makes sense, because if it's, man, we're talking 1950s, going back to the start of the Opium Wars and it being a problem even before that, it just coming to a head in the Opium Wars. It's 150 years plus of them trying to stop this epidemic and this issue in their country. And now you have this party in control that did that. They just solved a huge 150-year issue. Of course, there's going to be a huge amount of buy-in and loyalty to that party, being like, well, they did this. Let's let them do all the other shit.
Yeah. I completely
This isn't
agree.
me being pro-communist. What I'm simply doing is I'm simply stating that you can definitely see how it was put in a very prime position to be able to succeed due to basically the machinations of a whole bunch of outside interference, a la the British.
And the only reason that I pause is because I don't know how much they stomped out opium as opposed to the rest of the drug trade had caught up in China. So there were more options for different kinds of drugs that maybe you wouldn't be as reliant on opium for. Mm-hmm. And then when the Communist Party does come in, the way that they kind of curb all of the opium things is anybody that's caught with opium or addicted to opium, they just throw in jail and torture. So do you really fix the issue if you just torture all the addicts? I mean, that's a different thing.
I didn't discuss the methods in which they did it. Common people, the people that were voting, just saw opium stop becoming an issue.
To the greater parts of society, they saw this scourge end up leaving. And that's a pretty big promise to come through on.
It's like having a burglar epidemic, and all of a sudden you're just like, man, did you notice that all the burglaries have stopped? And it's like, yeah, less people around too.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I mean, we can't argue with the results, I guess.
What happened to Bill down the street? He loved opium. Mm-hmm. Where did he end up?
But, I mean, this basically brings us more to current day, and basically springboards us into when we do it. And I don't know how long we'll be able to hold off on doing this now that we had so much fucking fun doing this.
Yeah.
Is going into essentially like the rise of communism. And this should basically be a very simple connect the dots during this episode to see how we got from fucking basically there wasn't an A to Z. It was a very short connect the dots. that led to the status that China is, where they're more isolationist. There's not really a peek into their country. And at the same time, we're looking, it's so weird that all the countries that are against communism, and again, this isn't pro-communist, I'm just saying it's weird that there's no accountability of being like, do you think we had something to do with this? Like, do you think we had it? Like, I feel like we kind of maybe like gave them a nudge.
Yeah, do you think when we start talking to them about illegal trade and flushing fentanyl into our countries and manipulating their currency and these things, do you think we should be the ones telling them that? Because that's sort of our playbook when we took them over.
I mean, that's it. We gave them a playbook on how to do that, and now all of a sudden it's shocked that I never thought my own weapons would be used against me.
Yeah.
But like, and then we go to criticize and be like, hey, you guys are doing all this shit, and they're like, yeah, that sounds like it sucks, huh?
And I don't know how much time we have, but just to kind of, the way that I connected the dots here, and the reason that I can kind of look at China, and I think you look at them the same way now and just be like, oh, well, this sort of makes sense that they're in this situation. Things didn't really get better for China after the Opium Wars. Because Japan goes ahead and just railroads the shit out of China during World War II.
Yeah.
Didn't give them a lot of credit for World War One. Didn't give them a real pat on the back or anything like that. We sure as shit didn't give them back Hong Kong.
And saying World War II, how many years were they going at it even before? Because like we were telling them the whole time, like, hey man, stop doing that in China. Quit doing that in China. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll stop doing that in China. And then it was like 3 years later, we're like, hey, we thought we told you to stop doing. Like there was shit going on years before World War II.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden we run into the Korean War after World War II, and the Russians that are now fully communist, they're fully communist, Karl Marx, all that kind of ideology, Marxist ideologies, end up talking with China, and they're like, hey man, I know you guys are fighting a civil war, we have our communists there, we need to try to keep democracy out of here, let's team up, let's back North Korea, we'll start teaching you some of our ways.
Let's be comrades.
Exactly. And at this point in time, Mao's already in there. Mao's just getting fed this new communist playbook that's going on in Russia. So by the time all of this happens and you leave the Korean War, not only did you just fight a war against the West again, but you also have this 100 years of humiliation, this century of humiliation that you've endured.
Just to consistently pull back to his propaganda. And like we said earlier, there's truth in it. There's still people that remember their grandparents possibly talking about being affected by this kind of stuff. And so when that propaganda is punched up, because it still has that truth to it, maybe not to that degree, but it grabs something inside you. And it's like, oh yeah, I remember when we got fucked over. That makes sense.
Yeah, so not to say that we're really truly on the side of communists here, but you can understand how that choice was made.
On the side. What we're on the side of is understanding how it got to that point.
Yeah.
When we did the Hitler episode, we discussed at length his rise to power and how that happened, and there was a playbook to it.
Yep.
And again, it was caused by people not foreseeing the severity of what they did in this situation, the Treaty of Tianjin being so fucking lopsided versus the Treaty of Versailles. That was the same way. You get a fucking people that you are basically just like fucking downtrodden, and they're looking for someone that can give them an answer and give them hope, and they're willing to take a gamble, and sometimes that gamble turns out not to be a great thing, but it succeeds.
Oh, well, and then you get into communism and the Red Square Massacre.
The Tiananmen Square.
Or Tiananmen Square, yeah. When things like that happen and there are, millions of people showing up dead inside of a country, not good. When you are communist and you control the media and all the news that gets out and you can control the narrative of what happens and everybody else believes you because you've brought them out of this terrible time in life that you've told them about since they were children in school, sometimes you get some leeway. I'm not saying that they deserved it, but at the same time, I can see why Chinese people wouldn't be too bummed to be communists.
Yeah. Yep. All right, man. You got anything else?
No, this was fun as shit.
It was.
was really excited
It
about
fucking
this.
explains so fucking much, and that's what I loved about it. It was so easy to be like, that's how that fucking went down.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us in another episode, and we'll catch you next week.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit him with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.